Good morning. Welcome back to Planet Doug Behind the Scenes for Tuesday, November 15th, almost 7 a.m. in the morning. I paused there for just a millisecond because I couldn't remember what day it was. But yeah, it's Tuesday, November 15th. Yeah, just woke up, made a cup of coffee that's actually striking me as a bit too strong. I spoon in instant coffee, and if I spoon in too much, it gets a little bit beyond coffee taste into bitter coffee taste, and that's what I have this morning. But I can deal with that. I just stepped out of the shower, got my wet hair, raining outside here in Kuala Lumpur, as it tends to do these days. I'm hoping for good weather tomorrow because I have some plans for tomorrow. A Planet Doug subscriber reached out to me from the town of Kajang, which is perhaps an hour outside of Kuala Lumpur. I can get there by MRT, no problem. So that'll be a lot of fun. Just getting on the train and going outside of KL to a small town, or it might even be a satellite town. I don't know if you leave the urban sprawl of KL to get to Kajang. I'm not sure about that, or whether you like fully leave the city, go out into the countryside, and then arrive at a brand new little town. I'm not sure. I don't know a lot about Kajang at the moment. I didn't do a lot of research into the place because I do want to be surprised to an extent. For this trip to Kajang, my main interest, of course, is just meeting this man and having a chance to hang out with him. That's what I'm looking forward to. That's always a lot of fun, of course. Meet someone new, see a new side of Malaysia, and having a local person guide you around is quite an experience because it takes away all of the issues that I usually have, just finding your way, knowing how places work, knowing anything at all, knowing how to pronounce things, and that you take all that away and the experience becomes quite different, quite more enjoyable in a way. No, I do like stumbling around on my own and never having any clue what is going on, but sometimes it's nice to have a break from that world and have a local person just sort of take you around and just take care of all of that communication. However, there is another side to Kajang. It is known as Sate town. It's known for the high quality of its satay. I don't know how to pronounce that word either. I think there's a British and an American pronunciation, like where the emphasis goes, satay or satay. I think satay is the British and satay is American. I always end up saying something like satay. I put the emphasis on the end, and for all I know, that's not even how you pronounce it. But satay, skewers of meat on a stick, on barbecue, and apparently Kajang is known for having the best satay in Malaysia. If not the best, very good. And we're going to visit a whole bunch of those places while I'm there. I got an email giving me instructions to, if you do have breakfast, have a light breakfast, because we're going to need a good appetite for all the satay places we're going to visit. So I'm pretty excited about that. Satay falls into a weird category of food for me because it's something I would enjoy all the time. It's simple, it's easy to eat, and it's everywhere. If you're walking through markets, you see grills set up. Almost anywhere you go, you'll see satay being cooked, and the smell, of course, is amazing all the time because it's meat on a barbecue. And then they all, I assume, have different sauces and things like that. And yet, for some reason, I rarely stop to get any. I don't know why. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer that I'd get some every time I see a satay stand or a satay barbecue grill, but I almost never do. Yeah, I don't know why. This is a mystery to me, even to me, why I don't have satay more often. Might be just holding a camera all the time, walking through the market, and now you've got this skewer of meat, and could be the sauce dripping. I don't know. But anyway, I'm very much looking forward. This is tomorrow. Today's Tuesday, and I'm hopping on the train tomorrow morning and going down to Kajang. Just a day trip, spend the day there, spend midday afternoon, and then come back to Kuala Lumpur again. So yeah, that's what's happening tomorrow. I have a lot of pop culture thoughts on my brain this morning. In a previous video, I talked about how excited I was for the new UFC event, UFC 281, which happened on the weekend. Mixed martial arts, the only sport that I follow these days. And I've watched every single UFC event since the organization was founded. I'm pretty sure I've seen them all. I've seen every pay-per-view and every fight night in the history of the organization, and that's a lot. And I'm also a bit of a completist, so I think even people that follow MMA closely and follow the UFC, they will still focus on the main card and watch the main card because they want to see the main event. You know, UFC 281 has a headline main event, a championship middleweight bout between Israel Adesanya from New Zealand and Alex Pereira from Brazil. That was a championship bout. That was the main event. The entire event was built around that fight, and people focus on that. But I watch the whole card because they have an early preliminary card, then they have a preliminary card, and then they have the main card. And I like to start at the very beginning. I'll start at the early preliminary fights and start right at the bottom and work my way all the way to the top. I do that all the time if I'm able. I've said I've seen all the events, and that would mean I've seen all of the main cards. There have been some early preliminaries and preliminaries that I haven't seen, but my tendency is to watch the whole thing. And I was very glad that I did that this time, because I think when people don't watch the early prelims and the prelims, they miss out on the best fights usually. I tend to find all the best fights are in the early prelims and the prelims. The fights on the main card, they get all the publicity. The fighters there are the best known fighters, and yet I don't know, a lot of those fights end up being duds, because what they'll do is they'll match up a big name from the past with a young up-and-comer. Because I mean, for the main card, they're trying to sell tickets. That's their main goal. So they're focusing on the marketing, not necessarily on the quality of the fighting, if you see what I mean. And then expectations get raised so high that often those fights can be disappointing because you've heard so much of them. But for the early prelims and the prelims, you often don't even know who the fighters are. The UFC has gotten so big now. There are so many fighters on their roster that I don't even know them. I mean, I don't have enough time to keep up with the sport to that extent. I know the names of the big players. I know the champions and the contenders and, you know, the top 5 in every league, in every division, that sort of thing. But I don't know all 500-600 fighters on their roster. I don't know, maybe there's 700 by now. I don't know how many there are. So on the early prelims, there'll be a lot of names. I've never even heard of these people. But because of that, you tend to get real fights. You don't get marketing fights. You get fighters that are, you know, put together in a match because they are 2 of the best young fighters coming up. And you get some really amazing fights, highly skilled fighters down there. And the fights themselves are very, very skilled and very entertaining. And this card, UFC 281, was like that exactly. So many of them, from top to bottom, were exciting and a lot of fun to watch. I won't go, I'm tempted to call up the entire card and talk about every fight, but of course this is not an MMA podcast. When one of these cards, one of these pay-per-view events, UFC 281, when it is over on Monday, I like to dive into all the podcasts, because there are a lot of MMA podcasts now. You know, the MMA Hour by Ariel Helwani, of course, is a very well-known one. He puts on 2 shows a week. Each one is 4 hours long, and I end up listening to all of them in full. MMA Fighting, the website, puts out a whole bunch of podcasts, pretty much one every day. They're usually helmed by a guy named Mike Heck, and he puts on a whole variety of podcasts every day. He has a series he calls Heck of a Morning, based on his name, you know, Mike Heck. So it's like HOAM or home, heck of a morning. He has a lot of listener calls. You know, people call in, ask him questions. He answers questions. He recaps the events of the weekends. He talks about all the big news. They do a lot of predictions for upcoming events. He has a betting podcast where they talk about, you know, what the odds on every fight and the best, you know, bets you can make. Betting has become more and more prominent in the UFC, which personally I'm not a big fan of, but it's kind of inevitable. The sport has become mainstream now. It's very popular, so of course the betting world has taken notice and everybody's betting on fights now, and there are lots of podcasts talking about strategies for betting to make money, and not a fan of that at all, but it's a part of the sport now. And then they have he has a podcast about future matchups. Like every time there's a big event, then he'll do a podcast about, okay, in the future now, based on who won and who lost, who should we match up in the future, you know, moving forward. And so he does a whole, there's a guy, Luke Thomas, who I used to like a lot. Ariel Helwani from the MMA Hour. He used to have another podcast called The Beat, the MMA Beat, which was kind of a round table of very well-known MMA journalists. And they would meet once a week and just talk about all the fights, talk about everything. And Ariel Helwani was sort of the host of that, the MMA Beat. And Luke Thomas was one of the journalists of the MMA Beat, and that's how I know him. The MMA Beat doesn't exist anymore. Ariel Helwani, he left MMA fighting. You know, he left the MMA Hour and he went to ESPN for a while. And he was employed by ESPN as a broadcaster and doing podcasts there. But now he's back at the MMA Hour and back at Vox Media, which owns MMA fighting. But anyway, Luke Thomas, who I liked a lot, a very outspoken guy, always had a lot of controversial opinions, and he defended his opinions strongly. He was always entertaining to listen to. He has his own podcast now called Morning Combat. And he has a co-host. Apologies to the co-host because I can't think of his name right now. Luke Thomas, and yeah, the two of them are equal on the show. It's not the Luke Thomas show. It's the two of them together, but I can't remember the name of the other guy right now. But anyway, the podcast is called Morning Combat. And so since UFC 281 ended, I've been listening to all these podcasts over the last or over Sunday and Monday. You know, they come out pretty quickly. As soon these guys, they're such passionate fans of the sport. The UFC 281 event might end at 1 in the morning, New York time, something like that. 2 in the morning, can go quite late, and then they do their post-fight shows immediately afterwards. So they will stay up until 4 or 5 in the morning doing their podcasts and their post-fight analysis and post-fight interviews and things like that. So yeah, these shows come out really, really fast. So I could hear, you know, some of them already were available on Sunday, and then on Monday and Tuesday. Today, the MMA Hour should come out. They're scheduled for, well, no, it's on Monday. Yeah, he does it on Monday afternoon, but that's U.S. time, and I end up getting it as a podcast. He does it as a live show, which is pretty amazing. A 4-hour live YouTube stream. And he does it every Monday and every Wednesday. Amazing, he can do it. But then it gets packaged as a YouTube show. You know, it's there as a YouTube video, but I just listen to it as a podcast. I just do audio only. I don't do video. So I miss out on a lot because they do a lot more video content now. They're always talking about visual things. They have visual aids, but I miss out on all that because I'm only listening to the audio as I'm walking around or doing whatever it is I'm doing. But then, yeah, the MMA Hour will be coming up soon. And then there's one more, probably my favorite out of all of them, called the Co-Main Event, which is put on by Ben Fowlkes and Chad Dundas out of, man, I want to say Minnesota. They're from one of these states that you would not expect a big MMA podcast to be coming out of. Yeah, I want to say Minnesota, but I think I'm getting it wrong. But it's one of those states you wouldn't expect. You'd think they'd be from LA or New York or, you know, some big city, Chicago, some big city, but they're from a small town in the middle of a, you know, big Midwestern. Is that like a Midwestern state? Anyway, and they're funny. They're also comedians in a way, so their podcast has a humorous side to it. It's not just strict, serious analysis. They're both very funny guys. And they used to have a variety of special guests that would do funny things on their show, and those have kind of dropped off. What's the guy's name? They had a guy who put on a funny voice, and he pretended to be an actor, a serious actor, and he would come on and do things for them. Niles somebody, I forget his name now. It's not his real name, it's just sort of this name they created for this character. But Niles hasn't been around for a while. But yeah, it's a very, very popular podcast now, and really entertaining to listen to, the co-main event. And yeah, they're a lot of fun. And their podcast usually comes out on Tuesday as well, and I haven't heard it yet. But anyway, my head is still filled with UFC 281 because I've been listening to all these podcasts. And in my other behind-the-scenes video, I was talking about the fight in particular between Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. And I predicted, and I hoped, and I predicted that Alex Pereira would win based on his punching power and his size and his strength. And he has probably the most deadly left hook in mixed martial arts. Maybe, I don't know, it's unbelievable. People know the left hook is coming. He's known for knocking people out with the left hook, and yet people don't seem able to do anything about it. And he just takes people out with that left hook over and over and over again. And that's what he did to Israel Adesanya. Everyone agrees that Israel Adesanya was winning the fight. I think he was up 39-37 on all the scorecards going into the 5th round. So he was going to win the fight almost no matter what. He was on his way to a decision victory. But in the 5th round, finally, Alex Pereira got close to him, backed Israel Adesanya up against the cage. And I don't know. This is the theme of the fight for me, that he managed to put Israel Adesanya against the cage, have him right in front of him, and Israel didn't move. He's an incredibly mobile guy, very fast, very agile, has amazing footwork, and yet all throughout this fight, Israel Adesanya kept letting Alex back him up into the cage and then keep him there within punching range. And man, oh man, the commentators, I haven't heard anyone else talk about this, but I rewatched the fight. I watched it one time, and I rewatched the whole fight a second time, and then I rewatched certain sections of it a third time. And when I watch the fight, I see over and over and over again Alex getting Israel back against the cage, and then he launches that left hook, and it just sails by Israel Adesanya over and over and over again. He's just out of range. He's just not landing that left hook. He's almost there, but he's not quite there. And every one of those left hooks, every single one throughout the entire fight, would have knocked Israel unconscious. Every single one would have knocked him out. None of them landed, though. And yet they got into the fifth round, and then again, all Israel had to do was move around the ring, pepper him with tiny little shots. Didn't have to do anything at all, and he would have won the fight. But at maybe halfway through the round, Alex Pereira kind of marched towards him, and Israel backed up against the cage and just stood there against the cage and just sort of traded punches. And sure enough, that left hook finally landed, just whack, and knocked Israel Adesanya, he dazed him. It didn't knock him out, dazed him. And then Alex followed it up with, 5, 6, 7 heavy strikes. And there was a little bit of controversy about the ending because the referee jumped in and stopped the fight before Israel Adesanya was unconscious or like flat on his back on the ground. He was, I mean, one more punch would have done it. It was obvious. It was obvious to me. It's pretty clear. The fight was over. No matter what was going to happen next, Alex Pereira was going to hit him with one or two more punches, and he was going to be unconscious on the canvas. That was inevitable. And then the referee jumped in and saved Israel from the final punch and just called off the fight, and Alex won by knockout. And people were saying it was an early stoppage, like people who are fans of Israel Adesanya and wanted him to win. They're saying, oh, that was an early stoppage, you know, that he still had a chance to recover and he could have won the fight. Personally, I think that's pretty ridiculous. You watch the fight, he was out, he was done. The fight was over. Though I have to say that I also thought it was an early stoppage in the sense of the sport as a whole. I hate it when the refs step in before the end of the fight. It's like they're making a judgment call that the fight is over, and if they let the fight continue, the guy who's losing is just going to suffer unnecessary punishment. Like the referee in this case jumped in because he made a judgment call that the fight was done. Israel Adesanya was practically unconscious, and one more punch was not going to make any difference, except it's just going to hurt him more, kill another million brain cells or something, do damage. Because, and this is the key, they make the decision based on whether the fighter is intelligently defending themselves or not. And if they're not intelligently defending themselves, they jump in, call the fight, and save them from more damage. And to be honest, in this case, when you look at Israel Adesanya's posture, what he was doing, he was not intelligently defending himself. He was just bent over, his arms and hands were down, he was like swaying from side to side. And one more punch was coming from Alex and was just going to, you know, knock him sideways. And the ref stepped in and said, you know, I've seen enough, this fight is over. I was happy. I was watching the fight, and I have a personal dislike of Israel Adesanya just because of his lifestyle and his personality and his character. Everything about him just puts my teeth on edge. Never liked the guy. I always thought he was overrated as a fighter as well. I didn't see why he was as great as people said he was. I won't go into all the history of all his fights. He's a good fighter, no question. He was a deserving middleweight champion, but he was not nearly as good as Israel Adesanya thought he was. You know what I mean? Very arrogant, very odd kind of guy, the way he handles himself when he's being interviewed, things like that. And in this case, he carried it over. The post-fight interview right after the fight is something to behold, because since he's become a multimillionaire, in terms of his fashion sense and his sense of lifestyle and luxury consumerism, Israel Adesanya has just gone off the deep end. With the way he dresses, the way he looks, the cars he buys, his lifestyle, it's gone kind of insane. And he outdid himself at the post-fight interview. He lost the fight, and a lot of fighters who lose don't go to the post-fight interviews. They don't want reporters asking him questions. You know, wow, how you lost? How do you think you lost? You know, they don't want to talk about it yet. But he did show up, so props to him for that. He lost the fight, but he still went to the post-fight interviews. But he showed up in this giant, bright, like orangey, like rust orange fur coat. And he's actually got this tiny head, and yet this coat just surrounded him. Like he looked like Chewbacca. You know, there's a lot of comments on YouTube making Star Wars references because he looked like Chewbacca, and he's got this giant furry thing wrapped around his body and this tiny head. And I don't know whether it was real fur or not. I tried to find out because, of course, people do not like fur coats as a rule. And in the YouTube comments to all these videos, people were tearing him apart for, you know, animal cruelty, wearing a fur coat. But to me, it was just fashion cruelty. It was such a ridiculous coat to wear. I mean, I don't know what he was thinking, but I assumed he thought he was going to win the fight. And then he was going to march out on stage in this giant fur coat for some reason. And I'm sure he wanted to wear the fur coat because it probably cost $30,000. And that's what he's all about. He just likes to buy things that are expensive just because they're expensive, not because they make any sense. One of the reasons I'm not a big fan of Israel Adesanya. Yeah, that fur coat. Man, I have no idea what was in his head thinking that made sense to wear that thing to an MMA event, but that's his fashion sense apparently. And he had the giant diamond studded watch that was probably worth a couple $100,000. You know, stuff like that does not impress me, put it that way. But anyway, I'm just explaining my dislike for Israel Adesanya, and when he lost the fight, as I was watching the event, I was very happy. I was here. I watched it here in my room, and I was hooting and hollering and getting very excited because I was so happy that Alex Pereira, won the fight. Unfortunately, they're going to do a rematch, which is something else I don't like in the UFC these days. Everything is a rematch. You know, if the champion loses, they have a rematch right away, and they do that because it makes money. Right? Both names are now super popular. Now there's a storyline to follow. You know, Alex defeated Israel, so now in the next fight, what's going to happen? Will now Israel, was it a fluke? There's all these storylines they can follow up on. Now everybody knows the name Alex Pereira, and everybody already knew the name Israel Adesanya, so they can sell more tickets. So for them, it's a no-brainer to have a rematch. But MMA is not like boxing. Like in boxing or wrestling or kickboxing, people fight a lot. You know, kickboxers and wrestlers, they'll have a match early in their career, at least every month, every week, every 2 weeks. They fight and they fight and they fight and they fight and they fight. MMA is different for some reason. They have this idea that they need at least 6 months to recover from the damage taken during a fight. So these guys never fight. It drives me crazy. You become interested in one of these MMA fighters, you're interested in their story, you like them, you become a fan of them, and then they fight, and you might not see them for a year. A year and a half is not uncommon between fights. So, drives me crazy. So now Alex Pereira and Israel Adesanya fought. Very entertaining fight. I enjoyed it very much. And now they're going to just put the two of them back together again. So I was looking forward to this fight for like 6 months. Now, you know, waiting and waiting and waiting for it to happen. Everyone talking about this fight, talking about these fighters. Now the fight happens, and now they put together a rematch, and it could happen a year from now. So now they're going to be talking about these guys for another year until they finally face each other again. And I really wish they wouldn't do rematches, you know, but it makes money. So it's inevitable as well. I would much rather have Alex Pereira fight for Robert Whittaker. I was going to say Forrest. I always want to say Forrest for some reason, Forrest Whittaker. But Robert Whittaker, Bobby Knuckles. The co-main event podcast, by the way, Chad Dundas and Ben Folks, they gave him the nickname Bobby Knuckles in their podcast. And I think it kind of stuck. So like Robert Whittaker is often referred to as Bobby Knuckles now. And he never wanted that nickname. I don't think he even calls himself Bobby Knuckles, but his unofficial nickname is Bobby Knuckles, thanks to the co-main event podcast. But that's the fight I want to see. I want to see Alex Pereira against someone new. I don't want to see Israel Adesanya again. I'm sick of the guy. He's been fighting constantly, and I hate the double champ system they have now in the UFC. Every time someone is a champion in one weight class, the first thing they want to do is go up a weight class or down a weight class and become a 2-division champion. And I hate that because all you get are fights about the same small group of people. Which again is why I like the early prelims and the prelims, because at least you get to see new fighters, unfamiliar names, you know, new fighting styles, things like that. But in the main card, you just see the same fighters over and over and over again because they rematch them. It takes such a long time between bouts, and then they'll go up and fight in a different weight class. So Israel Adesanya, he went up to light heavyweight, and he fought the champion, John Blachowicz? Blachowicz. Sounds odd to me, blah. But anyway, Jan Blachowicz, a Polish fighter, he was the light heavyweight champion. And when Israel Adesanya was the middleweight champion, instead of fighting another middleweight fighter, which I think he should have done, he went up to light heavyweight. He wanted to become the light heavyweight champion, and then he'd be champions of both divisions. Conor McGregor was the first fighter to do that, to become a 2-division champion, and it kind of rocketed him to superstardom, and now everybody wants to do it. And I don't know, I just wish people would stay in their own division. So yeah, a lot of storylines coming out of UFC 281. As I said, I could call up the fight card from the first fight. The very first fight in the early prelims was so entertaining and so much fun. And then right from the very first fight all the way to the main event, everything was entertaining in one fashion or another. Yeah, really entertaining card, and I could talk about it for a lot longer. If I went fight by fight by fight, I'd be here all morning. So we'll call an end to it there. Yeah, in my opinion, the good guys won for a change. You know, in this fight, I thought of Alex Pereira as the good guy and Israel Adesanya as the bad guy. I don't know if I should really give Israel such a hard time, because I'm no psychologist. I have no training in the field, but my sense I get from the guy is that he's very unsure of himself. Like at a fundamental level, he lacks confidence in who he is, and what he ends up doing is compensating for that by projecting an image. Like he's always thinking about how he appears to other people rather than just being who he is. He's fake. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, he's just so unsure of himself, and then he just develops this persona that he puts out there. And in the post-fight interview to this fight, he just lost to Alex Pereira. This is right after the fight. He's wearing that ridiculous fur coat, which again is part of this persona he's trying to project out into the world. And then he answered questions, and everything about him, the way he answered questions during the post-fight interviews, just kind of made me feel bad, because it was so clear he was being fake and insincere and putting on this persona. He wasn't being himself. He wasn't being natural. It was just strange. This word gets thrown around a lot in mixed martial arts, but for me it really applies in this case. He was cringy. I was just cringing. I couldn't even sit through most of the interview the first time. I had to turn it off because I just felt, it just made me cringe listening to him talk. Everything he said was just so weird. And then, I kind of wanted to give the guy, benefit of the doubt. And I thought, okay, listen to the whole interview, just do it again. So I went back and I watched the whole interview again, but no, it's exactly the same. Just weird. And I think it just comes from insecurity, the way he's projecting this persona. That's just, everything about him is fake and false. And I really like people that are just themselves. You don't have to put on an act or anything like that. But he's so insecure, I don't think he can just be himself, which is kind of odd when you think about it. He's widely viewed as one of the best fighters on the planet. Like in his chosen field, he is a superstar. He's a megastar. He's a multimillionaire. You'd think, given all that, and even before MMA, he was a major star in kickboxing. Highly skilled kickboxer, an incredible athlete, all this talent, all this success. He's probably got a room in his house, like just wall-to-wall trophies, just all this stuff telling him how great he is. And yet with all of that, he still seems so terribly insecure. I don't know. You think with all that success, you'd eventually, I don't know. You think you'd eventually relax, and you don't have to impress people anymore. You've already impressed them. You don't need a $650,000 McLaren and a ridiculous fur coat and this ridiculous patter that he comes up with during interviews to impress people. You don't have to impress them. You're the champ. You've been the champ for years. You know, just be yourself. But yeah, for whatever reason, he just comes across to me as being completely fake. Anyway, that's enough of Israel Adesanya. Unfortunately, we'll see him again because there is a rematch, I'm sure, coming. They haven't announced it officially, but I think it's inevitable. There will be a rematch between these two. Keeping with pop culture as the topic for now, that's what's on my mind right now, because I watched UFC 281. And I've been watching a new TV series, which I'm actually pretty excited about, and that's kind of rare. This one is called Arcane. Arcane is the name of the series. And I called up their entry on Wikipedia because I don't know anything about it. I've been watching it, and I'm enjoying it. And I got the basic idea that, well, it's an animated show, and it's related to anime, of course, and it's based on some kind of a video game, a computer game. So there's a very famous game out there that this show is based on. And usually those don't go well. You know, like, how do you take a game and turn it into a movie? Like, how do you create believable characters and storylines out of a flat, two-dimensional video game where there really are no characters or storylines that you can invest in? But they did it here. So anyway, I knew nothing about it. I just started watching it and loved it right out of the gate. But I wanted to get some of the facts out of the way first because I just looked it up. So the full name is Arcane League of Legends. It's an animated action-adventure streaming television series created by Christian Link and Alex Yee, produced by the French animation studio Fortiche, under the supervision of Riot Games and distributed by Netflix. And it's set in Riot Games. I guess that's where the video game comes from. And I guess the video game is called League of Legends. I don't know anything about it. I think I've heard the name, but I know nothing about computer games. I've never played them, so I don't know anything about them. But so I guess Riot Games produced something called League of Legends, and Arcane is set in the fictional universe of League of Legends. And I didn't know this, but it says here that it was released to widespread critical acclaim. So I guess the first season was very, very popular, and critics loved it too. And they've announced a second season, so that's very good. It's great to be watching a show that you really love, and I'm in the middle of season 1, and now I already know that season 2 is coming, so that's great. So it's already in production, so even if season 1 ends on a cliffhanger of some kind, you know, season 2 is coming. So it's not like one of these shows like Firefly, you know, of course, which broke the hearts of people like me worldwide, you know, when it was canceled after one season, you know. But of course we got a movie out of it too, and the movie was extremely good. So we did get that, but we didn't get a second season of Firefly. And they talk about the genre, and that makes sense to me because it says action, adventure, drama, science fantasy. That makes sense because it's not really science fiction. I think of science fiction as being more reality-based, science-based, and science fantasy is a little bit more in the world of magic. And of course, Arcane, of course, relates to magic. And the final genre, steampunk. And that's very interesting. I mean, I couldn't give you a definition of steampunk, but I have a feeling for what it is, what steampunk looks like. And the world of Arcane reminds me of Howl's Moving Castle, the Miyazaki film. That whole world that they built for Miyazaki with, it's sort of, there's some very advanced technology in that world, but it looks like old technology. So it's like you're living in a modern technical world, but they're still getting around on steam trains, like steam locomotives and airships, blimps and things like that, go floating through the air. And yet even though they have all this extremely old primitive technology, like a steam locomotive and blimps, they also have very advanced technology, that more advanced than what we have today. So that's kind of steampunk. And in terms of world building, I don't know if I'd call it original. I'm enjoying it very much, but as someone who watches a lot of mainstream shows, pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, stuff like that, it feels very, very familiar to me. It's almost like they got out the playbook for world building and says, okay, this works, this structure works, so let's do that. And for example, what they have is an underground world, an entire society of workers, poor people, living in a very dangerous world of gangs and alien creatures, apparently. It looks very Blade Runner-esque, for example, that kind of crazy underground world. It's always dark, it's always gloomy, it's always smoky, it's always raining, everybody's poor, there's danger on every street corner. And those are all the workers. The people that do the work of this world are living down there in this underground world. And then you've got what they call Piltover, which is the upper class. And they are all living in this beautiful city they're above the rain, they're above the smog and the dirt and the grit. They're almost living up above the clouds, beautiful sunshine. Everybody on there is rich and beautifully dressed, and they have the military on their side. They have what they call the enforcers, which again, they kind of remind me of stormtroopers though, which is always kind of weird, because in the show they keep talking about, oh, the enforcers are coming. Oh, you don't want to get the enforcers upset. Oh, we got to keep the enforcers out of our area because they're just so deadly and so dangerous. And yet almost every scene where the enforcers show up, they get their butts kicked, almost every time. They seem like a joke almost. They're like Star Wars stormtroopers. Everybody is like, oh, the stormtroopers. And yet they're like the least effective fighting force in the universe. But now the enforcers in Arcane are kind of on that level to me. I don't know what it is. I don't know why everybody's so scared of them. I've got all these, children. There's a gang of 4 children that you follow at the beginning of the show. And they're just like street urchins. They got street smarts and stuff like that. And they come up against the enforcers and they just beat the crap out of them every time and outwit them every time. And I don't understand what is so scary about these enforcers. But anyway, apparently Piltover, the elite, they have this army of enforcers, that maintain the peace and keep the poor people in their place. So you've got that division between the working class living underground in this grimy area, and then you've got the rich people living above them. So that's kind of a classic setup. You see that over and over again in science fiction, in science fantasy, and that helps. It's an interesting, useful tool for driving the plot forward. Plus, with main characters, one of the main characters is a man called Vander. He's in the underground, he's like one of the leaders of this society. And he has a backstory. And the heroes of these stories always have a backstory. It's always the same, that, they always used to be like some sort of an incredibly powerful warrior, a black ops operative, a master assassin, the greatest fighter the world has ever known. And yet, at some point, they reach a stage in their life where they do a sharp right turn and they take their weapons, hang them up, and they say, I'm done with that life, and now I'm going to be a simple barkeep. I'm going to run a tavern, and serve beer to people and be a nice guy from now on. And then they always reference his history, that he used to be, the deadliest fighter the universe has ever known. And they'll show his weapons still up on the wall. And this is all foreshadowing, because an episode is coming where he's going to be driven to the point where he's had enough. and it's time to fight back, right? And he's gonna get those weapons down from the wall, you know, strap them on and go out there and take care of business. That's a classic storyline. Of course, we've seen it in TV shows and movies over and over and over again. So they did that in Arcane as well, but with a twist. Very, very interesting twists. So in terms of Arcane, just sort of adopting the plot playbook for a lot of these things. There are so many things in there that are just kind of obvious. One of our main, or I guess two of our main characters are young girls. And there is this thing, you know, these days where the young girls, even though they weigh 110 pounds soaking wet, they're out there wiping out legions of 200-pound men, you know, soldiers. They're out there with their skills and beating the crap out of it, you know. And, you know, you get that, you kind of got to put your sense of logic to the side and say, okay, in this world, it makes sense that this 110-pound girl just took on 5 fully armed, you know, 200-pound soldiers and won. You know, it's like, all right, okay, I'll give you that, you know. So you get a lot of that in this show. And another plot point that you always see in shows like this, whether science fiction or science fantasy, in science fiction, there's usually some sort of artifact or technology or powerful thing that they find that belonged to an ancient civilization. So there was a civilization that existed maybe, you know, millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and their technology was so advanced and so powerful that in modern times we can't even understand how it works anymore. It even looks like magic to us. And it's also so powerful that it lasts over time. It's so durable that they're out there digging around in ruins and they find some piece of metal or some piece of stone or anything like that, and it turns out it's like a powerful weapon or has all these abilities they try to uncover. So you've got a science fiction world of advanced technology compared to what we have now, but then there will be another layer on top of that, of this unbelievably powerful technology that they uncover that comes from an ancient civilization, you know, from millions of years ago, an alien race that, you know, an empire that doesn't exist anymore, but their cities, the remains of their cities are there, and they uncover this technology that they can still learn to use today. And in science fantasy, you get something similar to that, but quite often it's like a magical force, some powerful magic from the past, you know, some object that can be used to, or some book that has spells in it, or some powerful incantation that can tap into this power of the universe. So it's kind of the same thing, whether it's science fiction, it's more science fantasy, it's more like magic, but they're both so extreme that they kind of meet in the middle. So there's almost no distinction between them because the technology is so powerful and so unknowable that it's pretty much magic anyway. And I think that's where the name Arcane comes from, the idea that this knowledge is so secret and so mysterious that very few people, you know, can possibly know about it. You know, it's an arcane system, arcane knowledge. And they do that in Arcane, where it's not science, but it's magic, where, you know, some of our characters are uncovering this ancient system of magic. And then, of course, there's this idea that civilizations that have long vanished were destroyed by this magic because in the wrong hands it's so powerful, or you tap into these dark forces of magic, and if you don't know what you're doing, it can get out of control and you'll wipe out your entire world. So you've got all that going on as well, you know, an ancient civilization, an ancient magic from the past, you know, that they're bringing into the present day, and that's a pretty standard plot device you see in all these sorts of shows. And so yeah, I see that in Arcane as well, that it's not completely original, but there is a lot of imagination in this show, incredible world building. It reminds me a little bit of Alita Battle Angel as well. That popped into my head when I was watching it. surprises too. They have the plot playbook, as I said. They're following the playbook to an extent because it works. It's a tried and true story that they're telling. But at the same time, when they get to key plot points where you know what's going to happen next, they do something different. Something else happens. And it was like, oh, you know, I definitely took my cap off a number of times in the first few episodes that I watched. It's like, okay, I like that. That's different. I haven't seen that before. And they're making choices in the storyline that really keep you on your toes. It's like, whoa, okay, you just did that. I was not expecting that. And oh, that's another right turn. I was not expecting that. So there's a lot of imagination going on there. So it's a very, for me, with my interests, it's a very compelling storyline. Really interesting characters. Everything about it I love. So yeah, I'm like halfway through the first season. And I'm already so sad because I know it's going to end. You know, I always feel that way when I'm really invested in a good show and you're counting the episodes. And it's like, oh no, there's only X number of episodes left. You know, you don't want it to end. You know, you just want it to continue. But we do get a second season. So in terms of pop culture, that's my other current obsession, Arcane. And the story of Powder, Violet, and Vander, and all these other great characters. Yeah, really interesting show for me. Enjoying it quite a bit. The last couple of days I've done a few interesting things that I thought I'd talk about for a minute or two. On Sunday, I went to REXKL. And on Sunday morning, I shot a behind-the-scenes video, and I was talking about REXKL, how Daryl from Wander Eats told me about it, and then I just sort of stumbled across the REXKL building by accident. It's just around the corner here in Chinatown. And I'm on my second cup of coffee, by the way. Better mix this time, not quite so bitter. I controlled my spoon when I added my instant coffee. But yeah, on Sunday, I decided to go to REXKL to get my morning coffee. They have a coffee shop there called Stellar. I thought there would be a bunch of coffee shops, but I think there was only one, you know, Stellar, so that was the only one there. But I wanted to go there to get a cup of coffee. And I heard that there was a very interesting bookstore there. And I'd already explored the lower ground a little bit, where the food court, basically, if they call it the background marketplace. And I'd gone in there, I think on Saturday, the day before, just to look around. And I thought I would go back a second time, get a coffee, bring my GoPro with me, film the place, explore the place from top to bottom, and capture some of that on video. So I did that on Sunday, and it was kind of a mixed bag in terms of results. And I didn't really have any expectations because I didn't know anything about the place other than what I had already seen, just looking at the ground level food court and the bike shop. That was my main interest. There was a really interesting bike shop there called Outsiders Bikes. And I talked to the owner there a couple of times. I'd already been back twice before that, you know, just to talk to this guy. And so I'm modifying my bike a little bit, my handlebars in particular, because my bike was put together before the era of video and YouTube. So I don't really have ways of mounting cameras on it. So I'm trying to adjust things and figure out what I can do, what accessories I can pick up. Assuming that I end up riding my bike at all in the future, I want ways to put, you know, cameras on the bike, and I'm trying to figure that out. So I was talking to this guy about that. But anyway, Sunday morning I went back there. I went to Stellar for coffee, and the coffee experience was okay. I mean, I ordered a cappuccino for some reason instead of a latte. I intended to order a latte, and for some reason the word cappuccino came out of my mouth. I think I got flustered during the ordering process because I didn't understand their menu, and my brain got all mixed up, and I just ordered a cappuccino for some reason. But I got my cappuccino, and it was not the luxurious sort of coffee shop atmosphere I was hoping for. And I guess it's not that kind of a place, because it's not like a fancy coffee shop inside an air-conditioned, you know, shopping mall. It's more of a place for coffee to go. They do have some seating on metal benches and a couple of other little chairs. The chair I sat in was one of the few actual chairs with a backrest. It was one of these weird metal frame things with elastic bands, and it just didn't fit my body at all. Just like, it was really uncomfortable. And it's all outdoors, so there's no, air conditioning or anything. So if it's hot outside, it's hot while you're drinking your coffee. And the cappuccino came in a very small paper cup, and it felt kind of underwhelming to me to get this paper cup. And I picked it up and I was like, okay, that's very, very light, My Starbucks coffees come in paper cups as well, but they're more like, I always order a large, of course, and then the large is big, and you pick it up and it's like, that's coffee. Good, Doug, happy. Because a big, like a soup tureen of coffee, which I really like. These little cups, if they're a little bit lukewarm, it's gone. So why am I sitting here in this coffee shop? I don't have any more coffee to drink. So from that point of view, it's not a coffee shop I would return to, and I say that in the video. But still, I had my morning coffee there, and then I walked up through the several floors, and I won't talk about everything that I saw along the way because I talk about it in the video. And the highlight was the bookstore called BookXcess. And it's pretty interesting. I guess BookXcess kind of captures REXKL as a whole for me. I mean, REXKL, the building, it used to be a movie theater, quite a well-known one. And I think the Rex Cinema played a big part in the lives of a lot of people in Kuala Lumpur. I posted some pictures from REXKL on my community tab, and a couple of people already left comments saying, oh, yeah, when I was younger, I used to go there. We'd watch movies at the Rex Cinema, so it seems to have been a big part of people's lives. And then it burned down a couple of times, and then the theater was abandoned. The whole thing burned down, basically. But then in 2019, they decided to renovate it, and they renovated the whole building and turned it into a kind of marketplace, bookstore, and a community center, something like that, because they kept the room, like the ground floor where the theater used to be, the big wall where the movie screen would have been, and then all the seats in front of it. They kept all that as a single room, put up curtains, and put a stage, I guess, at the front, or maybe that's the original small stage that was in front of the movie screen. And then they tore out all the chairs, of course, so it's just a big open area. And I assume they put on performances there, put on lectures. I don't know what they do with that space. I've never heard of it before. But they could put a lot of chairs in that space, and they could have a big audience watching whatever's happening on the screen, or maybe they use that space for all kinds of community events. I don't know. So that's one interesting side to the place. And then on the top floor, you've got BookXcess. And I found it interesting because I don't buy paper books anymore. I don't know anyone who does. And when was the last time you saw someone on a bus or on a train or on the subway, holding an actual book? I don't read a lot these days, but if I do read, it's on a Kindle. I use an ebook reader. Very few people read these days, I find, but if they do read, they're reading on their tablet, on their smartphone, something like that. And very few people would buy a book anymore. So this whole BookXcess bookstore is a little bit of a relic. And you can see that most of the people that were there for, just like I was there just to look at the place. I was taking video, but a lot of people there were there with cameras because visually it's very interesting the way they designed the space. And then there's all kinds of interesting angles you can get for taking like pictures that have all these geometric attributes to it, like these huge walls of books and things going on. So it's a great place to go around and take fun pictures. So I think a lot of people go there on a weekend to hang out, look at the bookstore, but very few are walking out, with an armload of books. I don't think many people are buying books. It's more like a place you visit because it looks kind of cool. And the fun thing about the place is what I talk about in the video, that because it was an old theater, it's not designed to be a bookstore. The bookstore was in the balcony area. And of course, balconies have very steep inclines because they want all the chairs, you know, everyone has to have a view of the movie theater. So it's not a flat space. The whole space is on an incline with a lot of stairs, you know, leading to different sections. And rather than try and make the place safe for people to walk up and down, whoever, you know, designed this place thought it was a good idea to make the stairs as dangerous and as irregular as possible. So they actually took all these stairways that were already kind of weird and steep and irregular, and kind of like, you should put up a sign here saying, you know, be careful going down these stairs, they're kind of steep. Instead of making them safer, they rebuilt them in all these weird irregular ways with steps that have different heights, different places to put your feet, blocks in places, and they made it as dangerous as possible to make it even more difficult to climb up and down all these stairways. And then they put up more signs, humorous signs, you know, like puns and plays on words saying, you know, whatever they're saying. Is talking about how dangerous these stairs are, like be careful going up and down these stairs, you know, pay attention to this sign because it might save your life, you know. From an insurance point of view, I really wonder how they can get away with that. You know, I can see an insurance inspector going in there and it's like, okay, so you deliberately designed these stairs to kill people. Like, you did that on purpose? You hired a carpenter and gave him a design to make it look like this? You did this on purpose? And, well, yeah, but we put up a big sign warning people. Is that okay? And the insurance guy is like, well, okay, you did put up a sign saying it's dangerous, so I guess it's okay. And he signs off on it. But yeah, you have to wonder what happened to the insurance premiums because of these various stairways, you know? Of course, you don't have to take those dangerous stairs to get in and out. There is like a main stair, and then, but if you go off to the sides and go exploring, and you go looking for these stairways, which is what I did, of course, you can find some pretty crazy ones, you know, and places where you can hit your head pretty badly, in fact, and then nobody put foam or bubble wrap around all these sharp edges. They just left it wide open and just put a sign on the wall that says, hey, don't hit your head. Because yeah, you smack your head against that I-beam and boy, you're going down, you know. That'd be like an Alex Pereira, you know, left hook to your forehead. Yeah, you're going down. And you're probably bleeding on the way down. So that was a lot of fun. So I went there and that was kind of interesting. And the theme of my recent time here in this part of Kuala Lumpur has been a search for places I enjoy to get food, and I've been struggling with that a little bit. I talked about that on a video and people made comments suggesting places I can go. And of course, one place I checked out was the Tang City food court, which is nearby here. I still haven't eaten there. I keep intending to. I haven't gotten around to it yet. Well, I saw it on a day when it didn't look very attractive or very interesting, but it was kind of empty. Nothing was open when I was there. When it was on a rainy, really rainy afternoon, very grim and gray and dark and not very pleasant. And yeah, but I haven't been back for a meal yet. Could be a lot better on a regular day. But people also suggested food courts in other places. One suggestion was to go to the UTC building, and that was kind of interesting. It's like a government building right on the corner here. So this was yesterday. Yeah, I went there for lunch yesterday, and I thought, oh yeah. You know, I went to the Maybank building, and as I was leaving Maybank, I was right beside UTC. So I thought, okay, yeah, I'll go look for this food court. And this was on a Monday. So, you know, the government offices would be open. So I thought the food court would be open and perhaps bustling. And that ended up being quite interesting because I got there over the pedestrian bridge. You cross the busy road on this pedestrian bridge, and the bridge, you can go down to street level or you can stay on the bridge and it takes you right into the UTC building. And I thought, well, I'm already at this level, I might as well just continue on the bridge and go right into the building that way. Why not? But of course, that's kind of the unusual way to get into the building. And I just ended up in the parking garage. So I walk across this bridge and I'm in the parking garage and I'm like, well, okay, how the heck do I get into this building now? It wasn't easy to do. This was a kind of a crazy kind of building, actually. Very old building. And I guess if I had gone in through the main entrance from street level, then you end up in an area where there's a bunch of shops and you kind of feel like you're now in the building. And now you kind of get oriented. But when I came in through the parking garage, it was just sort of like, okay, now where do I go? And I'm just wandering around in this parking garage trying to find an elevator or stairways or a sign that says, go this way, go that way. And I couldn't find anything. So I'm wandering around in this area thinking, okay, this is a typical Planet Doug experience. I'm here to go to the food court, but I can't even figure out how to get into the building. I'm in the parking garage of this building, but I have no idea how to get, am I even in the building yet? I'm just completely lost. So I'm wandering around in the parking garage and I get to this long hallway. And way at the far end of this hallway, there was a woman leaning against the wall, and she was wearing what I think is called a chador, you know, the full head to ground black cloak, sort of Muslim dress. She was wearing the chador and the full black face veil. Niqab, maybe, is that what it's called? And it just leaves only the eyes visible. And this is for someone, from my cultural background, from Canada, not having grown up around that style of dress, it's very striking. I still remember clearly the first time that I encountered it, and this would have been I may have seen it other times, but the one time I really remember was when I went on a bike trip to Guinea in West Africa, which is a Muslim country. And I flew from Canada to Paris, and I had to transfer at the airport in Paris to a much smaller airline. It was a major airline to get from Toronto to Paris, and I'm in the main airport. But then once I got into Paris, I had to follow all the hallways and to get to my departure gate for the airline that was flying down to Mauritania, and then from Mauritania, another transfer or something from Mauritania to Conakry in Guinea. And as I'm going through the airport in Paris, of course, everything changes. I go from the main area and I'm getting down to these regional airlines, and it's like I've actually already arrived in a new country, because all the people in these departure gates are flying to Africa, basically, countries all over Africa. And of course, the majority of them are now African. So I'd already arrived in Africa before I'd even left from the airport. And as I got deeper and deeper and deeper into it, and I got to the area where my flight to Guinea was leaving from, now everyone was wearing Muslim dress because they were flying to Guinea, and these were all Muslim people. And the women there were wearing the chador, the full head-to-ground black robe. And this was one of the first times I'd encountered them in such numbers. And again, for someone like me, it was quite a surprise. It's like, wow. I mean, they're very dramatic articles of clothing, of course. For someone like me, with my background, all I think about are movies all of a sudden. I just have movie references, for how that style of dress looks. It's very, very dramatic. So I see this woman in the chador way ahead of me down this hallway. And then I start walking towards her, and I'm already thinking ahead. I've got, my brain is racing, because she's just standing there kind of looking down the hallway at me. From a distance, I can't see her eyes really. I just see the white, the brighter slit there where I can see, just that little piece of her face. Everything else is black. But she's not moving in any way, and she seems to be looking down the hallway towards me. And being a guy and being a strange male walking towards her, I don't want to freak her out. It's like, I'm not sure why she's even there. I thought, oh, there must be a bank of elevators there, like she's waiting for the elevator. So I'm thinking I must be heading towards the right area now, because why else would she be standing there? She must be waiting for the elevator. And I'm already thinking ahead to my body language, how I'm dressed, how I look, when this woman sees me walking towards her, how should I behave? Should I look her in the eyes? Should I not? Should I keep my head on the ground? I don't want to make her frightened or uncomfortable in any way. So I'm thinking, I got all these thoughts going around in my head, walking towards her. And I swear when I came up even with her, I was so freaked out that I bowed. I mean, I gave, like she was the queen or something. I just kind of gave a royal bow as I went by, and I looked her in the eyes and I smiled, and she kind of nodded politely back at me. And she must have thought, you know, why is he bowing to me? And I couldn't help it. It was just like an instinct. Just the way she was dressed, she had this regal appearance. With my background, you know, in science fiction and science fantasy, she looked like the queen of an empire to me, and I couldn't help it. I bowed as I went by. So that was pretty funny. Turns out there were no elevators there. There's nothing there but blank walls. I mean, there was some sort of a government office there, so maybe she was with someone who was doing something in the government office, and she was just waiting. But it was kind of unusual that she was just sort of standing there. But anyway, I bowed as I went by. But after I bowed to the queen of the empire in the hallway there, I did eventually find elevators. And inside the elevators, I found a guide that said on the 4th floor there was a food court. So I thought, okay, I'm on the right track here. I got in the elevator. It's a very old elevator. This is a very old, kind of weird building. And you know, when the elevator doors closed, you know, they came together like bang, you know, they're like bouncing off each other. They were not a well-maintained elevator, and it like rattles and shakes, and took me up to the 4th floor. And then it opened into another sort of empty rooftop parking area. And I'm like, I walk out of the elevator and it's like, okay, now I'm in another rooftop parking area. Where is the food court? And I had to walk through the parking area, and I eventually found a doorway that entered into a food court, which I had been looking for. And I left there satisfied. I had a good lunch, a filling lunch at a good price. Everything was fine, but it wasn't what I was expecting, because I think there were 3 restaurants open, like 3 food stalls open. It was a big area, and there probably were 20, 25 of them, like food stalls around, but all of them were closed. They just had the steel shutters pulled down, and there were 3 places that were open that I remember seeing. Very few people there, very few customers, and they were all Indonesian. Like every restaurant was Indonesian. They sold nasi goreng, like various versions of nasi goreng, and the next one nasi goreng, next one nasi goreng. They were all Indonesian places. So it made me think that a lot of the people that were having their lunch there were office workers or people working in the building, and they were Indonesian for one reason or another. But anyway, I did a walk around, and all the places to eat seemed relatively the same, and I found a place. There's a man there who was very engaging and very friendly. As I walked up, he sort of, you know, engaged me and says, "Oh, come, you know," and he's pointing out different things I could have. And I just basically had your economy rice. He got me a plate of rice, and then I got a piece of chicken and some veggies here. I don't even know what I got. I just grabbed a bunch of things. They had a bunch of trays laid out, and I got a bunch of things that I put onto my rice, and a couple of curry puffs and a piece of chicken. And then I sat down at a table, and the man came over with his little notepad, and he looked at what I had picked out, and came to 12 ringgit, which for that meal, based on my experience in Kuala Lumpur, is a good price, because at Vinijaya, it's all vegetarian. What I have there, I have rice, and then I have 3 veggie dishes all the time. One is like a tofu, and then 2 vegetables. And that's what I have pretty much every time I go there. And that always comes to about 12 ringgit for that. And then at this place, I had 2 big curry puffs, rice, my veggie dishes, and a piece of chicken. And that came to 12 ringgit. So in terms of the amount of food I got and the amount of protein that I got from the meal, was a much better deal than Vinijaya. I like Vinijaya, but I admit when I leave from there, I eat a lot of food. I mean, I pile my plate high, and it actually takes a long time to eat all of that food because the volume is quite large. And yet, by the time I get back to my hotel, I'm hungry again. It doesn't leave me with that feeling of being full. And I think that's because it's all vegetarian, perhaps. If you eat vegetarian meals day after day after day, I think maybe you still feel hungry. And then, because I've noticed that once in a while, I'll have all these vegetarian meals, and then one day, for whatever reason, I'll have like a big piece of chicken or 2 big pieces of chicken, and I have that with my rice and veggies. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh, whew, feel good. I just feel full. And then that feeling of being full and well fed, it lasts throughout a good chunk of the day. And I don't get that with the vegetarian meals that I've been having. So at this place, the Indonesian place, because I had that piece of chicken and the big curry puffs and the rice and the veggies, I walked out of there feeling, feel good. That was a good meal. And it was good value, you know, because I got chicken and it was still 12 ringgit. So that was my lunch. And then, even though, like I said, I felt full, it was still pretty early in the day when I had that meal. So by the time dinner time came around, I was hungry again. And I decided to go to another place that people suggested, which is right around the corner, Kota Raya. And the Kota Raya is this big, very unusual not department store, like a shopping mall. Many, many floors. And it's unusual. I've been there in the past a few times. A lot of interesting stores in there. It seems to cater to the immigrant community. So floor after floor after floor of very much bargain shops. And they cater to Filipino and Indonesian customers, I think. So, and a lot of hairdressing stalls, a lot of places selling really cheap clothing, really cheap bags, and a lot of cheap canned goods and packaged food that doesn't look immediately familiar to me because I think it's all like from the Philippines and from Indonesia. So they're basically selling all the foods that these people would be accustomed to from their home countries. There's a lot going on in this place. It's a really interesting building to walk around in. I was looking for the food court, and in order to do that, I had to go up the escalators, and it has one of those systems where you go up the escalator, and then the next one doesn't start right from there. You have to walk all the way around to the other side to go up another level, and then all the way around to go up and up. So you end up walking in a circle around every single floor as you cycle your way up to the top floor looking for the food court. So I got to see all the stores, and you could tell this is a real community. It's a shopping complex, but everybody treated it like their home. There was just stuff spilled out everywhere. There were people sitting on chairs everywhere, just hanging out and chatting. All the different shop owners, they know each other. A lot of shouting back and forth from place to place. Just a real energetic, high energy kind of atmosphere, and also low energy, as I said, because people are just sort of hanging out like they're at their homes, you know. And it felt very different from the rest of Kuala Lumpur because it is Filipino and Indonesian. Yeah, kind of a cool place to explore. Anyway, I got all the way to the top floor and I never found the food court. I got all the way to the top, no food court, and there's one more set of escalators, and I thought, okay, maybe that one takes me to the food court, but they were shut down, and it just led to a blank wall, like a steel shutter, so that whole floor wasn't even open. Maybe the food court used to be up on that top floor, and they shut it down, I don't know. But I never did find a food court, but on the top 2 floors, the main top floor in particular, I did pass a couple of restaurants, just sort of tucked away in amongst all of the clothing shops and the food shops and things like that. And some smartphone stores and a lot of hairdressers, tons and tons of hairdressers. And these, as far as I could tell, were all Filipino restaurants. I saw signs, you know, they looked like Filipino food, names like Adobo, you know, dead giveaway that this was a Filipino place. So I kind of picked one at random, had a buffet selection of food, and I went in there. And I kind of repeated my experience from the Indonesian food court that I went to. where, yeah, very friendly man. As I said, everyone, it was impossible to tell who worked there and who didn't, because it was just a big family hanging out. And then everyone else who came in seemed to be part of the same family. A lot of chatter going on, people hanging out, drinking tea and laughing and joking. And then this man engaged with me, and he says, yeah, well, I'll get you some rice here, and then you can help yourself to whatever you want. He's telling me all these dishes. And he says, oh, this is really good, this is really good, this is really good. If you want this soup, then I'll get you some of that soup too. And yeah, it made me feel very much at home. And I filled up my plate with different things and sat down at a table, and he came over and told me how much it was. And this meal came to 13 ringgit. And it turned out to be a really good deal as well, because one of the dishes I was focused on was a big platter of chunks of beef, like meaty, big chunks of beef. Like at Vini Jaya, they actually have some meat dishes there on display. But more often than not, if I do try one of them out, it turns out that they look like chunks of meat, but most of it is bone. It's like big chunks of bone with a little meat on it. But this place in this Filipino restaurant, you could tell it was just all beef. So I was feeling this need for some protein. My body was kind of telling me, okay, we want some of that. We need some of that. So when I spooned up some of it, I kind of got a bigger a bigger spoonful than probably was a reasonable portion. You know, I just sort of like, thumped, and then I got more of it. So I had a big mountain of this beef. And then I got some like banana leaf veggie, I think it was called. The guy said something about banana leaf, and I got a whole bunch of that. He said it was really good. Then I got this other veggie thing, and that was my dinner. And I tucked into that beef, and it was kind of difficult to eat. This was not tenderloin, you know, that melted in your mouth or anything. This was, you know, this came from the bullock, the tough, stringy bullock from the field who had tough meat. You needed good teeth to chew your way through all this meat. So I was there for quite a while. Luckily, I had my tablet with me, and I was watching an episode of Arcane while I needed a long time to work my way through all this beef that I had picked up. But again, I had the same feeling as after I left from the Indonesian place. It was like, that was a good meal. I felt good. I felt energetic. You know, I felt like I'd had a good meal. And it was because of all that protein, I guess, that I'd had. Yeah, really friendly place. I'm not going to tell you that it was good food. It wasn't even hot. Like it wasn't warm or anything. It was all like at room temperature. The beef was tough, stringy kind of beef. And there was nothing about this place that I would say, oh, you got to go check this place out. You know, that it was so nice or the food was so tasty or anything like that. It was just a big, hearty meal for a simple guy, you know, so it worked out well for me. And just going in and out of that Kota Raya shopping complex was really interesting. Yeah. I feel like I'm in need of a haircut pretty soon. I'm thinking I'll probably go back into that building and pick one of those places to get my haircut. It looked like that'd be kind of an interesting experience. So that was my last couple of days. Kota REXKL for coffee and bookstore, and then the UTC government building for my Indonesian lunch, and Kota Raya for my Filipino dinner. That was pretty nice. So I think I woke up this morning with a lot of energy because I had so much filling meals yesterday. I think the last few days I've been running a little bit low energy, and it might have been because I just wasn't getting enough energy out of the food I was eating or something like that. Anyway, I feel fueled for today. And tomorrow, as I said, I'm going to Kajang for Sate. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, that's going to be a good day. Well, I'm sure I've got a lot of other thoughts. I know I do, but I'm going to end this behind the scenes chatter here. Got to get started with my day. And time to shut down and move on to something else. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.